ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Stupid to Live, a podcast about romance novels, usually $5 and under. I'm your host, Becky Feldman, and I'm realizing right now that I am going to need a cold shower later. That is right, it is burning up in here. And sure, it could be because LA just did have this heat wave, so yeah, I guess it could be the weather. Or it could be because today is another episode of Hot as Hell with TSTL. On these episodes, I chat with your favorite and or soon-to-be favorite authors about their latest releases hot off the presses. In more ways than one, if you know what I mean. And if you know what I mean, please tell me, because I have no idea what I just implied. Today, we have a return guest on the show promoting her latest humorous fiction that includes such a heartwarming romantic subplot. Yes, my lovely and talented and oh so hardworking friend, Jessie Rosen, returns to the show to discuss her newest novel, All the Signs, which, if you read it, it will give you all the joys. And you know what? The publisher is free to use that quote when they publish, the next edition. Jessie and I had a great discussion about her epic journey writing this book. It was such a great chat, and you will fall in love with Jessie all over again. So please, prepare yourself for a nice cold shower later on, because author Jessie Rosen is about to get hot as hell with TSTL. Oh my God. Jessie Rosen, welcome back to Too Stupid to Live.
What an honor. And let me tell you, this is the first recording of a repeat podcast appearance. I am honored. Thank you so much for having me back. My friend, as you know, I'm a super fan of everything you do, but especially this podcast. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, it means so much to me that you are coming back and you're here. But really, what would mean the most is if you tell me, how has your life changed for the better since last appearing on Too Stupid to Live?
I got these bangs.
They look great. They look great. And I don't think I was going to ask you about them. I mean, not while recording, but yeah.
Don't worry. I'll always bring them up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
How has my life changed for the better? What a lovely question. I took care of some nagging health issues. I was having some back stuff. And I'm the type of person who will let it go for a very long time until it gets to be a problem. And I'm working hard on not doing that. So that's been really good. I've gotten some good PT for that. And, as you know, like the life of a writer and a creator, sometimes you're hunched or always you're hunched. So I've just been like working on my posture. So that's big. And then the other thing I started doing is I know this is cheesy and very typical, but a gratitude journal. I use this notebook that's called the 5-minute journal.
And
you know about it? The thing I like about it is it's morning and night, and it's really quick. They're serious about the 5 minutes. So it's you start your day by reflecting on some gratitude pieces and thinking about what could make the day nice. And then you end the day by reflecting on what was lovely in the day. So it's cool. It's been nice to have that bookend. So thanks, number 1, back number 2, and gratitude number 3.
Oh my God. What a perfect prioritization of those things.
And I want to be clear. That's not an accidental ordering.
When you write in your 5-minute journal, do you ever get ideas, creative ideas, or is it mostly just self-reflecting?
Oh, I should get creative ideas. No, mine is mostly self-reflecting, but and this is by no means meant to be a segue to talk about the novel.
Perfect.
But
great. I don't have to do it.
I have this very cool book by the wonderful astrologer Heidi Rose Robbins, and it's a book where every day you're following the astrology of the year, but the day specifically. So the days of Aries season and the days of Taurus season, and it has a thought prompt. So those, and
That's cool.
I look at that many mornings as I'm like, finishing up my gratitude journal and
Hmm.
preparing to do my physical therapy for my
Yeah.
back. This is all coming together. And I'll
Hmm.
look at that, and those tend to be little sources of ideas.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think this is a great segue into the book because honestly, it also like your journey talking about like taking care of yourself and
Mm,
taking the time for yourself. That is a huge theme in your book, All the Signs, which comes out
May 6th.
May 6th, which yes, I read it. I love it.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
The end.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, every book is essentially about what I'm going through at the time. I shouldn't say every book, every project, and a little
Mm.
bit. Do you ever feel this way? A little bit of what I'm compelled to work on or write is almost the thing I'm afraid to actually address in my life,
Yes, I got that with this
right?
book for
And
sure.
so
Yeah.
sometimes I have to work it out with a character and like put her through the scary motions.
Mm-hmm.
And with The Heirloom, which was my first book, that was about almost like rehashing the decision to be a married person and looking at that, even though I have been with my husband for many years at this point, but still, it was kind of like digging into something I was too afraid to touch then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this feels like the same thing of like this element of what is it going to take me to fully take care of myself? How am I going to let go of a narrative that is selfish?
Mm-hmm.
And then what is that going to do to my relationships? That
Yeah.
is like, I think one of the greatest questions and struggles of my life. So
Yeah.
it's in there. I didn't figure it out, but I think my character did.
I
So
think
at
she
least
did. Yeah.
one
Listen,
of
if
us did.
if it's fake, it's some at least it counts. You know what I mean? Fictional,
100%. Yeah.
non-fictional, it doesn't matter. Because like there's
Yeah.
something like like I like realize like looking at her journey of
Mm,
like, oh, she's like it's not that she's like she's just complacent and how like
yes.
being complacent like saying things are fine, which they could be fine. And I'm definitely
Yeah.
guilty of and just like
I know.
not thinking you deserve that extra step of well, like things can be better than like fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a big question about where to start this character. Should she start from I have a sinking feeling something is not right? Or
Hmm.
should she start from, I'm convinced that I'm on the path and I'm not looking left or right, I'm looking straight ahead, and then something, whacks her off course? Because in my experience, even if I'm not willing to look at it, and maybe this is just because, I live in a more introspective culture. All of my
Hmm.
friends are in a good way, always kind of looking at ourselves and trying to figure out how we can be more ourselves and like follow our intuition and live authentically. But that's not the case in every community.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to like look at how could you get to your mid 30s, your late 30s and not be in touch with yourself? Like what would that look like? So I was curious to do that and also to give it a lot of compassion.
Yeah.
She's living a lovely life. She has
Hmm.
beautiful family and loving supportive friends and there is nothing wrong with the choices she's made, and yet still they might not be all the way right for her. So I was like, I feel like that is still a tough line to walk in terms of
Yeah.
never saying that this is wrong and you followed the wrong path, but that this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. One of her main journeys through it is through like basically she starts out with like not believing in astrology. Um,
Right.
and basically like what kind of catapults her kind of curiosity journey is like what is up with not astronomy, astrology. So I have to ask like how much like tell me about the idea for the book first and then tell me how
Yeah.
much like like writing it mimics her journey.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea for the book is entirely based on a complete fascination that I have with astrology. And I sit in this place of I like delight in it and I
Mhm.
want to believe it. But the skeptic in me, which is kind of why I'm also not a religious person, it's like I can't go all the way. I
Yes, yeah.
can't surrender to it all the way. And so I've always kind of like danced with astrology and my own, and I've had astrological readings and I've been really interested in it. And I went on a very similar journey to find my own star twins
Hmm.
because I was fascinated by the idea of what we might share at a scary juncture in my life surrounding my 40th birthday.
Yeah.
And so this was something that I just thought would be interesting
Mhm.
to see who else was struggling with what I was struggling with. And I don't know, there's always a little bit of a kind of, is this a writing project? Is this a memoir project? I come from blogging originally, way back when I started writing. And so I did kind of think like maybe I'll write something memoir-y about this. And I think the truth is that there was so much depth that I wasn't ready to write about myself with.
Sure.
Kind of
Yeah.
going back to this, like it was easier to touch it with a character and to put her through the motions. And one thing I discovered about my own astrology is for whatever reasons, and I have theories about this, I am living in alignment with my own birth chart astrology.
Okay.
Kind of somewhat by choice and somewhat not by choice. So some
Okay.
of the passions that I pursued and some of the choices I made and some of the like risks I took are very much in line with what my astrology. I am a Leo. I have a
Hmm.
Leo rising sign and a Cancer moon for anyone listening that means something to. And if it does mean something to you, you're like, "Ooh," because there's a lot of like dark and light in my
Hmm.
astrology. So I was really became very fascinated with what would it, how would you get off chart? Like
Right.
what would the circumstances be, nurture versus nature, to make it so that you suddenly are living, if there is such a thing as a pull of the planets and stars, what would pull you out of that orbit? And that's what I wanted to explore in the book. And that kind of felt richer than
Yeah.
exploring a story where a person kind of like is just doing the thing and then some days it's hard.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, like I'm assuming stories have to have a beginning, middle, and end, and
Yeah.
like that whole thing.
Yeah, and also I wrote a believer in the heirloom, right? This woman who
Yeah.
was so superstitious, she so believed in her superstition, she needed to be convinced out of being a believer. And I thought it
Hmm.
would just be fun to write a skeptic. It just felt like,
Yeah.
these books are not sequels, but I did kind of want them to go together in terms of
Hmm.
like taking a woman on a journey, putting her on a mission, and feeling like it was really interesting to write the antithesis story.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to be honest, and maybe you hear this from other writers, especially in the romance category where they're churning, you're
Hmm.
writing a book a year.
Hmm.
Even though these books aren't romance, I did write them one year and then the next year. So having that structure to work with helped me get it done. And
Yeah.
that's like kind of a bit of how the sausage got made.
Right. Yeah. There's a level of like discipline in the romance world that I'm just like blown away with, and like,
Me too. And
yeah.
having gone through the project of writing this book so quickly, I don't know that I could do it year after year after year. It's really, really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just like having just a plethora of ideas, which you do have. You are, I'm
Thank you.
impressed that you came out with 2 books in 2 years. Like, I find it,
Thank you
that's
so
huge.
much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome
that is the
so
back. That's
much.
hence the back issues flaring up.
Yeah.
But it was worth it.
Look, it's all worth it. Okay. This is such a dumb question.
Ready?
But going back to the astrology thing,
Mhm.
before we go on about like you finding your star twins and things like that, can you just give me, and maybe for some of the listeners who aren't as astrologically
Mm,
verbose in this, what does
yeah.
like a Leo rising and
Okay.
talk about that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So from 10,000 feet, again, no pun intended, it's
Hmm.
much higher than 10,000 feet, though, where the stars come into play. But
Yeah.
your birth chart is a map of the position of the planets and the constellations and the moon and the position of the sun in the sky the moment you're born.
Okay.
And some of those elements change in different time periods. So your sun sign is the month essentially in which you're
Hmm.
born. So as a Leo, that's July 22nd to August 20th or 21st, I think. And so
Okay.
that's because, monthly, that's shifting position. Your moon sign is the position of the moon relative to other constellations when you're born. And your rising sign is the position of the sun on the Eastern hemisphere at the time you're born,
Okay.
kind of where it sits in the astrological map. So all of this is about like the positioning and the map and where you are physically.
Hmm.
And so the idea is that all of those planets and constellations power and different elements, and those elements are impacting us down here on Earth. And the easiest one to think about is, of course, the moon, right? So we know that the moon moves the tides here on
Mm-hmm.
Earth, and we know that we are made of water, like the water of the tides. And so you can kind of start to imagine, okay, well, if that's how the moon works, then how do the other planets work? And that's the vibe.
Okay, got it. Cool, cool, cool. So like
Mhm.
you where did you like okay, between the heirloom and all the signs, where were you on the spectrum of belief when you started all the signs?
So I was, because of the timeline of all of this, my 40th birthday had happened about 9 or so months before I started writing all the signs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was already on that journey of
Okay.
playing with my belief system. But I'll also say, and here's my creepy, like not creepy or maybe creepy, astrology origin story is I'm born in Los Angeles. It's where my
Mm-hmm.
parents were living at the time I was born. They then moved back to my mom's hometown in a charming small town in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
When I started to pursue writing and thinking about my life and what my hopes and dreams could look like, it started to appeal to me to make a move back to Los Angeles, even though I was only really here as a very little baby.
Right.
So I moved back to Los Angeles. I'm 26, I believe, meaning that my 27th birthday is the first one I celebrate here in LA.
Okay.
And at the time, I was living in an apartment that was very close to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, which is where I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And on the morning of my birthday, I shot out of bed, looked around. It was still dark. And I looked at the clock, and it was the exact time I was born, 5:15 in the morning,
Wow.
which didn't mean that much. I mean, it was weird to me, but you
Yeah.
say that to anyone in Los Angeles, and they say, you need to book an astrology reading.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what happened. I had never had a reading before. I didn't even know the concept of a birth chart reading or like looking at the position of, the stars and constellations when you're born. But that was when that happened. And it's been a long time since that birthday. So my kind of like experience with curiosity started way back then.
Okay.
And then every once in a while I would kind of dip in. So by the time I got to writing this book, I was much more a believer than a skeptic. And I
Okay.
would use astrology like to kind of check in with myself and be like, things are off. What's going on? And just like ask myself questions based on that. I would never really blindly follow it by any means, or make big decisions based on it. But I
Mm-hmm.
did like it as like one more tool for introspection. And
Sure.
I am compelled by its ancient nature. And
Mm-hmm.
I like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah. When you were like the main character Leia goes through this process of like what's so interesting is that you are an artist and a creative. She is a doctor. And
Right.
like I'm not saying that they're like the opposite, but in a
Right.
way
Mm-hmm.
they're two different ways of thinking. So I guess I'm like, do you think like when you were kind of going through your process, did you like think about like did you have more of like a scientific like the way she was thinking of like, oh, I'm gonna disprove it in order to prove
Yeah.
myself right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that fascinated me. The
Mm-hmm.
idea of like methodically plotting to chart a yes or a no. And I will say, even though my brain loves and pursues the arts, I like some precision. Like
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
pro con list girl. I like to, even when I'm writing, I like break it down into its parts. What is the most surgical way I can get this work done? So there is like a piece of my brain that likes that way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it would be fun to apply that science mind to this project and think about how that kind of person would go about it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and that was, of course, where I needed help from literal mathematicians and
Uh-huh.
people to help me figure out, like, well, how many star twins could there be, and how would we find them, and like statistically, how would we prove or disprove anything? And that was education that I had to go out and get. But the
Mm-hmm.
idea of doing it really appealed to me.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the character's journey is she has to take a sabbatical from work. So she decides to find her star twins to kind of disprove that astrology is real or whatever.
Mhm.
You did that in real life. So like talk about finding your star twins, how you started, what that experience was like.
Yeah, it was wild. And it was, I turned to social media, our friend for all things crowdsourced. And I
Mm-hmm.
started posting all these videos about looking for my star twins. And I was doing other marketing, but really people started coming to me through social media. And I was looking for an exact match, and exact meaning they had to share my birth date
Mm-hmm.
in my birth year at my time.
Okay.
And
Right.
so that was tricky, right? I'm 5:15 in the morning, and the way that astrology works, you can kind of go plus or minus that 5:15 a.m. a little bit and get an almost identical chart. But the
Mm-hmm.
degree of the earth changes so much and so quickly that like it really needs to be precise. So I started getting feedback from people and friends of friends and people sending people my way. And I was getting people who were a different hour, a completely different time of day, and I wasn't finding that exact match.
Mm-hmm.
Now, still, these people and I had really interesting similarities. Many people had pursued something I would say broadly in the world of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
A podcast producer, an entrepreneur who was creating kind of like a medicinal herb business, um, a person who had pursued kind of like a very creative angle of the law, a
Mm-hmm.
person who was in education, but in education in the arts, an opera singer. So that was really interesting to me. But the thing that all of us shared that fascinated me the most is this element of our astrology that speaks to this kind of like um, obsession with this like internal reflection. Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I doing okay? Am I okay? What could make it this like very somewhat selfish? We are Leos, and I probably should have said that up front that like a huge trait of Leos, right, is this kind of like self-obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
But with this group of people, we were all kind of looking at it in terms of like, am I a good enough partner? Am I pursuing this correctly? How can I better my relationship here? Just this like pursuit of self-reflection and self-improvement that was really fascinating to me. And
Mm-hmm.
that felt like core to all of us.
Yeah.
Um, but the final thing I'll say is that the person that made the experience of finding star twins the most fascinating was the twin I finally found that was minutes from my exact match.
Okay.
She reached out to me. I hadn't found a perfect match up until my birthday.
Mm-hmm.
On our birthday, she messaged me on Instagram. And that was the closest
Wow.
match. Again, not the
Yeah.
exact time, not 5:15, but I think she was like 6:04, something really close. And it made our chart similar. And in lifestyle, in life choices, and in the way we were living out our lives, we were almost complete opposites.
Wow.
And
That's
what was
cool.
fascinating about it is that she reflected back to me that she had followed a path that was there and that was safe and that was the opposite of some things that had not been safe in her life. So there were circumstances far beyond her control that made a lot of things unfold, but that when she looked at the things she was seeing and the choices that I had made and other people that were star twins that I was kind of public about, that felt very natural and right to her. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not something that she had had access to pursue for so many reasons. And that fascinated me even more. And a lot of that went into, with permission, the inspiration behind the character of the book.
Cool. That's so cool.
Isn't that like a little chills? Yeah.
Yeah. Because like in the book, like in addition to like, her discovering her star signs and all this stuff, like there's kind of, she realizes that there should be these like kind of goalposts of life of that, like when you're this age. And it's not like, oh, you should be having kids or like this age or
Mhm.
whatever. It's like kind of like what's it called? Like a marking point or like a,
Totally.
you know what I mean?
Milestones isn't quite right,
Milestone. That's it.
but almost like
Yeah.
mile markers. These like, where are
Yeah.
you at? These like pacing things almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so did you like see that with like the star twins that you were finding? Like, okay, we obviously did different things, but this can be the same milestone. You know what I mean?
Yes. Specifically in the category of a kind of like significant directional life switch around the same age for all of us.
Oh, okay.
And that was really curious to me. So many of us had kind of like been pursuing something up until X point, and then around the same age, 27, 28. And for the astrology heads listening, that's your Saturn return, which is a big developmental stage in astrology. And Yeah. And that was when a lot of us had this kind of like, okay, let's check in. This isn't feeling right. Someone had gone back to school. Two people had gone back to school. Someone had done a career change. That's when
Oh,
I
wow.
moved here. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of that theme, which I think
Yeah.
was really interesting because I don't know. I think there's something about those kind of, okay, it's not about what we did, it's that we did it
Yes,
that was
absolutely.
most interesting to me. And the individual that hadn't made that change, interestingly, that's when something presented that she said no to.
Interesting. So it was
And
like
that
the
was so
opportunity was
interesting to
there.
me.
Yeah.
The opportunity
Yeah.
was there. Yeah.
It kind of like, it must seem like you've just like like kind of just noticing like, okay, people in life do have a lot more in common. Like, I mean, 2 seconds ago, I just said doctors and artists are two different people. But like, really, they're not. You know what I mean?
Well, and I also think that I think what's most different about people is the way their brains process and think through things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
some people have to get there in such different ways in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like getting in touch with themselves, learning how to communicate better with individuals. Like the way we go about things is, I think, what's most different, but like
Mm-hmm.
what we want at our core and what
Yeah,
we're striving for and how we want to be loved, I think is really universal. So
for
I
sure.
had to think about with a character that was opposite me, like, what would it take
Mm-hmm.
for this person to be open to all these things that I'm pushing her to be open to and kind of pushing her quickly. And
Yeah.
I think that's the hard needle to thread when you're writing is like, I like to write things where the pages turn and there's churn and there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of plot, but then I'm changing a character's life very quickly. So like
Yeah.
what's going to make that happen?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's like a kind of like a pacing, like there's story pacing and then there's like life pacing and they're like
Yeah, and
fighting.
I never want it to feel completely unrealistic. I mean, as a young person watching like my favorite rom-coms and movies and stuff, one of my issues was always as as a 10-year-old film critic, just being like,
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, but not that would never happen that fast.
Right. Yeah.
And I get it now, right? You see yourself in this situation where you're needing to tell a story and you're wanting people to believe. And so I think about that a lot in terms of like, what would someone have to say to her, or what would have to come across her path for her to really be like jolted.
Hmm.
One of the things I introduced to help with that is that she is in this mysterious medical crisis.
Hmm.
And I tend to think that when things happen to our physical selves that make us feel so out of control, we're kind of like jolted into, whoa, what am I going to do about this? Like, change
Yeah.
needs to happen now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like for you, when did like the process become like you were finding your star twins, you're just, doing your,
Hmm.
when did the process move from self introspective, learning about yourself, trying to figure out your beliefs? When did it suddenly become like a creative journey where it's like, okay, this is Leia, this is her backstory, this is where she's going to go?
Yeah. The absolute real of what happened is I was so fortunate with Heirloom to have a two-book deal.
Okay,
And so
that's
very
awesome.
quickly after Heirloom, and really long before Heirloom came out, I was tasked with coming up with another idea. And I
Mm-hmm.
pitched three ideas, two that had nothing to do with this astrology project. And then I kind of pitched it almost as like, FYI, I've been doing this thing. Is
Yeah.
this interesting? Like
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't, and yet it was the only thing among those other ideas that it was the only thing I couldn't stop thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought about what I had learned from Heirloom about what it takes to immerse yourself in a novel and how hard the work is going to be, the other two ideas that I had just weren't compelling me in the way that this, at that point, nonfiction idea was
Yeah.
compelling me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm so fortunate to work with an agent and an editor who saw that and said, show us the fiction, show us the novel spin on this idea because there's something here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so very quickly that became the lead idea just because we were all recognizing, I think, the passion. There haven't been a lot of novels that play in this space exactly.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like seeing that potential, and I think it was really just because we had to do something quickly that I was
Right.
already passionate about, that I could already like wrap my head around. Um, that sounds kind of like unartistic, but I do
No.
think that, and I kind of also think that the longer I exist in this space, the more I recognize that creativity inside a box of we have this timeline, we have this objective, we have this idea is kind of a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was something so great about saying like we have to go. So what is
Yeah.
the thing pulling you and compelling you and what is it going to be and what is possible? Where have you already done research? Where do you already have like a fascination?
Mm-hmm.
Because this you're going to live with this now very intensely for, about 16 months.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's something about it that just because of the timeline, you're
Yeah.
forced to be raw or more raw,
Yeah.
whatever that word is. You're the writer.
No. I don't know what the word is. Yeah. I I think that's right. And I think very quickly it was like, okay, making decisions in the process of writing a novel is the hardest part because
Yeah.
everything is on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So the timeline, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was cursing the speed of the timeline as I was doing it, but I had to be so decisive because it was time to form this story and get this outline together and know this character. And I'll say every decision I made that was further from the heart of how I felt, people that I really knew, experiences that I really had got thrown away
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't get there.
Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
was, searching for it. One fascinating example is I had named the romantic interest Benny because I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that's cute. Benny. He's cute. He's hot. I can picture it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know anyone named Benny. And there are two men in my life, a young boy crush and a person who didn't come back, but kind of came to me in my 20s and really saw me in a really clear way that no one else really had at that point. And both of those people were named David.
Wow. And that's the
And I
name
was
of
like,
yeah.
so honestly, I just changed the name to David thinking like, I'll change it back to Benny. I just have to get this character out.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I need to, find him. And then, of course, he had to be named David. And like in honor of both these guys who were fantastic people who, came into my life and moved on in their own ways, but were pivotal. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was like one more example of the constraints of this timeline that made me get creative in ways that I'll be using for the rest of my writing life.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that because like I felt like one of and not that this wasn't in the heirloom as well, but like the way you describe settings, it's like obvious that like it's like you can imagine yourself there. And so I'm kind of like, I mean, even though David is just a name and a character, but like, I kind of feel like you were like setting up the scene in a way that was just like, okay, it really helps you to like visualize where she's at and like kind of the history behind it. And I found it so striking in this book.
Thank you. I think that this is a piece of growth between the first book and the second book. And, coming from writing in the film and TV world where you're not asked to provide as much rich, right there with them detail, that has been a learning curve for me.
Yeah.
So like making characters and making romantic moments and making place and emotion feel really real is a place that I have worked hard to get better at. And that's where when I'm reading in between writing, I'm kind of like, how are they doing it? How are they doing it? Like, that's what I'm highlighting to figure out. So it's such an honor to hear that was kind of coming off the page for you, because those are areas that I'm really still growing as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting just because like the writing that I do is screen stuff, and there's an art director who's going to do the whatever stuff.
Yeah.
But it was just like so striking. I guess maybe like, because, your previous book, it's a travel journey. There's also a travel journey in this. I'm assuming the places she goes to are places that you have been to in real life.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And this time, the last book I wrote during the pandemic or a portion of the pandemic where we couldn't really travel. So I had to pick places that I had been in the past, but I had like a nice memory of. This time I got to go to one place that was a big piece of this story, which is Venice, Italy.
Yeah.
And so the Venice of it, I had been there more recently. I went as a treat for both research and for my 40th birthday. So it was like all surrounding this time in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that the Venice of it, when I look at like what that felt like and how I was able to do that. And then there's a little portion of Venice that takes place on a small island off the mainland of Venice called Burano, and like writing those scenes and getting to go there. I think the whole book benefited from the experience of being able to travel there. I wasn't, of course, able to go to every location in the book, but it's something I think about and understand very differently in terms of what you see and what you don't expect to see and places that you stumble upon. I did not intend for the island of Burano to be in the book at all. And yet
but it's such an important
there,
place.
and going there was like no way it couldn't be in the book. And there was a period of time where I was like really wedged in there. And then I had to kind of make it make more sense. So I understand that. And it's a little bit of a full circle thing for me, because in relation to the character as well, this novel has always been something that has felt very indulgent and very selfish and very bougie, and something that wasn't something I grew up with the ability to do. And so deciding to spend on travel, this was a different circumstance for me. I had had this book deal. But in the past, any time that I thought I needed to go to research something to write it, I couldn't see the value in affording the cost of that trip. Right. And when I hadn't sold a project yet, or it was exploratory. And so I think it's really helped me understand how much a part of our work that is.
Yeah.
And to see that it is an investment and not just an indulgence. And of course, also, indulgence is incredibly important. So it's like,
exactly,
it's like all those things, but in a way I was like a little bit like living the point of the book as I was writing the book and researching the book, because I was having to make these choices that were centering myself and try to not see them as self-centered.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting because it's like, well, do we need to even label this? You know what I mean? Like, as an indulgence versus like, a research, does it matter?
Right. And this is such a good point, because who are we're labeling it for conversation with other people.
Yeah. For people that we assume are going to like be like judging us. And it's like, I'm doing all of this thinking for something that, like, a conversation that I don't even know is going to happen.
Yes, 100%, which is like, and I'm working through it, but like continues to be like a major principle of my life, is like,
right, yeah,
preparing for conversations that may or may not happen with people that may or may not care.
Yeah.
And there's some dynamic about that in this book. I'll call out like one line or phrase that so funny. Like when you think about when you're preparing to write the book and you think like, well, this has to happen and there's certain things that are like, that it has to be in there. And the phrase "must be nice," this concept of like, must be nice, had to be in the book.
I love that part.
Few things I was certain about, but I wanted this exchange among women, especially, to have this conversation about that thing we hear and that thing we say, and perhaps that thing that we had said to us of "must be nice." And so I'll let readers find it in the book, but it was so important to me because it's a big struggle of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. About the Venice moments, and like, I feel like the book there's an interesting cast of characters that she's with, like the side characters. And so I'm just like, please tell me, like, who was Amani based on? Like, and Sai, and like those characters.
Okay.
They're so memorable.
I went through this really interesting kind of like life and business coaching experience and retreat with a woman who was in a world with other women who kind of do that work. And so having gotten to meet people in that space, I kind of melded them all together into this like superhero of these different women. And they were really inspired by, two incredible life coaches who I love so much, who are honored to be, the reference points. Susan Hyatt and C. Renee Washington are their names. And so they are real people who kind of became this amalgamation and created this character. Sai was because one of my real star twins is a Turkish pop star.
No way.
Yes. And so I was like fascinated by that. And I've created Sai as a character that is originally from India and then comes to Turkey. And there's a reason for that. And I wanted to make that happen specifically. But like in my head, the idea of her encountering kind of a pop star or famous or person in that category, kind of, I wanted to play with that.
Yeah.
So that person is kind of inspired by some different people. And then, I would say the rest of the cast of characters that she encounters are mostly fictional. Yeah, mostly fictional. There are a few other people in the mix who it's almost like I needed people to be these like truth tellers or these message offers. It's almost, there is a bit of a kind of Wizard of Oz vibe in that in this book, there are three people that really end up being the big people along her journey. And so
Mm-hmm.
without that having been a reference point, I was kind of thinking about the idea of that. What is this person helping her see? And what is this person? And then what is this person?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because it's like, oh, the person is just this, like, I don't know, like flourishing as the place that she goes to,
Yeah.
which is also like in the heirloom. And I'm so curious, like, do you see like travel as a theme? Like, I don't know what you're going to do next. You don't have to say what's coming up next, but do you see yourself as being like, oh, I'm going to write stories that like are literal, like journeys, journey based. I'm a journey
Yeah.
based writer, I guess.
It's so funny because I think about this a lot in terms of, um, I'll be very honest, and I'm sure this makes sense to you. These books are hard to categorize, right? Because
Right.
they're
Mm-hmm.
not true romance, they're not true rom-com, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they do have elements of both. And so it has been really interesting to think about like how am I defining myself? What are people going to expect from me as I continue and really hope to get to continue writing books? And this idea of women on a journey really is something that appeals to me. There's
Yeah.
something that appeals to me about I'm going to go. I'm going to do the
Mm-hmm.
thing. I'm going to take
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think for me, travel is transportive.
Mm-hmm.
You so leave your comfort zone. And I think this happens when you're even on a vacation that isn't necessarily about meeting your star twins around the world.
Right.
And they say like you're supposed to live at home like you're on vacation and travel abroad like you're at home.
Mm.
Right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
behave on a trip as if you're a local and
Yeah.
behave when you're home as if you're on vacation, which is such a charming thing to say. But
Yeah.
I think the truth is very often because of access to other cultures, because of access to comfort and discomfort, because of the happenstance and serendipity of travel, a lot of the time it fast tracks
Mm-hmm.
realization.
Yeah.
I have
Absolutely.
had
Yeah.
these like profound moments of understanding of the world, of understanding of myself, of understanding of the people I'm traveling with, that's for
Mm-hmm.
sure, on these
Yeah.
trips.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think there is something really powerful about them. And I think a little bit of what if we kind of like use our writing to kind of offer to the world an idea of one thing that might be helpful, I
Mm-hmm.
think travel is helpful, kind of like
Yeah.
universally, no matter what.
Right. Yeah. 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 That's so cool. Okay. You mentioned like having to do research. Tell me about like the research you did. Like what was something that you had to research that like, oh, you didn't expect you would need to, but you needed to?
Oh my God, the math of the astrology and getting the astrology right was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very anxious about anybody who really knows their astrology or really knows the mathematics of statistics or medicine. My character is
Mm-hmm.
a doctor, an OBGYN, which is about as far from the medical world as I get. So I think that the math and the science, the elements of my character that were true to her were really tricky for me to get right. I'm
Mm-hmm.
really lucky to have a cousin who is a nurse in
Oh,
a
okay.
NICU.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent her every passage that pertained to those things to make sure that like the language was right and that all felt right. Um, I can say that the affliction that kind of my character unfortunately kind of befalls is vertigo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And oh my the I needed to give her a problem, a medical
Yeah.
problem that was kind of like debilitating, but not, but how could she live with it? But how do we solve it? So the amount of information I now have about proximal, vertigo, is like the specific kind of vertigo that I had to
Mm-hmm.
give her, and then the physical therapy that solves it is like way more than I bit off way more than I could chew, but I had to
Mm-hmm.
get it right. So
Yeah.
I would say that the like medical stuff and doctor stuff was the biggest stuff.
So did you like meet like I know you said you had like you spoke with a nurse, but like when you were like
Mhm.
looking up like PT stuff or like vertigo
Yeah.
stuff, like what was your process for that? Like,
Yeah, I would go to PT specifically.
oh
So I
wow.
spoke to three different people that had this specific kind of vertigo, which is a
Yeah.
vertigo that comes on when you bend. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
not just always that you're dizzy, because that wouldn't be great for for my
She wouldn't
character.
be able to travel. Yeah.
So I talked to like 3 people who had that and got their firsthand take. And then, as you recall, I was handling my own back physical therapy. So I was
Exactly.
able, I'm like, in my own physical therapy, like getting adjusted, and I'm like writing down questions and answers about how you would treat this specifically. So it's not that I don't trust internet research,
Right.
but I don't know. I think I'm always just, cautious of being accurate. And so I tend to like to go to the source. I mean,
Hmm.
4 different astrologers consulted on this to get the
That's
astrology
so
right.
cool. Yeah.
And I just kept kind
Yeah.
of going to them and asking more questions. And I wanted to make sure, because astrology can be somewhat subjective. So
Hmm.
if I was only using one astrologer and then I suddenly ask another one and their perspective is completely different, I was kind of cross-checking everything. Same kind of with the vertigo. Like, what was
Yeah.
your experience relative to yours? That was for sure.
So would you like, not like cold call, but like tell me the process like of not Googling stuff. What's it like to not Google?
I know. I mean, first I Googled, and
Mhm.
then honestly, again, I took to the social media.
Yeah.
And I would be like, ISO, someone with vertigo,
Right. Yeah.
ISO, a PT. I would kind of like go to my source of friends and people who know people and kind of cast a net and then try to find people in that way. And I
Hmm.
will say, like, I don't know what people did in the time before that, because it's been my experience that there are people who are just so willing to help.
Yeah. I mean, that's so cool. Like, I guess as someone who has like social anxiety, like I can't even send an email. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, oh, wow, that's like you talk to another person and like, well, people have been doing that for, centuries. I
And
find it
also,
fascinating.
this is another example of the power of the forced timeline,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I was desperate.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I've got to get these vertigo people fast. And I
Hmm.
do think that some of my timeline impacts bravery. And I've really
Mm-hmm.
seen that with this project where I was up against something. I had to get it done. I did not have time to be wishy-washy about, is this email that I'm sending absolutely perfect? Because it is my nature to be more wishy-washy.
Right. Yeah.
So it was so interesting how having this being like, a bit like, up against it with this project forced me into this like expanded bravery of myself that I don't think I would have had if I had all the time in the world to write this book.
Right. It seems like you developed like a muscle and that like I imagine you're going to use forever.
Hope so. I mean, I think the biggest learning was kind of people really want to help.
Yeah.
People are rooting for you. They're rooting for you in this creative project. They want to help you. They want you to get it right. They're happy to get on the phone. So I think that was the thing. I always assume I'm pestering someone.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
always
yes.
assume it's
Hmm.
burdensome. And as
Yeah.
it turns out, like, people are so delighted to get on the phone and talk it through. And people who are tangential or in the arts are excited because they can relate. And
Hmm.
people who aren't are fascinated by the prospect of, what does this process look like and how can I be involved? So that's great, because, I'm going to need that moving forward.
Yeah. That's so cool. Like that's like, oh gosh. It feels like you're like writing the journey mimics the main character's journey to the point where I'm like, oh, this is like a book within a book. Not that book within a book, but do you know what I
It
mean? Like,
feels that way. Well, and
yeah.
it's so interesting because it's like I couldn't have gotten this knowledge without writing the book, but now
Hmm.
it's like I have to write a whole second book about writing the book.
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
exactly what I want. Yeah, like
I
write about
know.
writing a
And
book.
I always did think like, oh, would it be so interesting to write a memoir, like to now write the memoir.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I always thought like it was a nonfiction project. And when I pursued it as a novel, I thought like, oh my gosh, am I blowing my chance to pursue this as more of a personal project, more connected to like the blogging or the Substack work that I do. But
Hmm.
now I'm really fascinated by the idea that like maybe should I ever pursue it in a different format? Like, was this actually the right order? Because the things
Right.
that I had to learn along the way of writing this couldn't have been learned without writing it.
Right.
And I have this big theory now that I'm wise, wise old writer of only 2 books. I think that one of the fastest ways to change your entire life is to write a novel.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
And I think so. I'm really fascinated by that as like I don't know, why is that and how did that happen and how did I have to show up for myself to get this work done? What did I have to dig into about my own psychology that I didn't want to look at before? Like, and I'm willing to say that even if you're writing something that's much further from yourself and from your own experience, I think my idea still applies. And
Hmm.
this is like an interesting test case of that. So I don't know, maybe like that's the book. It's about how like writing a book changes your life. And here's my example. I don't know.
Hmm.
We'll have a
Yeah.
little sidebar with some
Yeah.
pitches.
Perfect. Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
What is your like daily writing process like for you? Describe a day. Describe a day in the life of Jessie Rosen writing all the signs.
Yeah, it's so different when I am on draft and
Okay.
needing to get pages done every day and when I'm
Hmm.
not.
Right.
And I find that when I'm needing to really be churning and I'm writing, for this project, 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. So I'm really like churning some stuff. I need to get the writing done before the day gets in my way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't mean like I have to wake up and run to the space where I write and get there before the sun rises, but I can't, like, for example, go to a Pilates class and have breakfast and coffee with a friend and then sit down to write. So
Yeah.
it makes my life looks very stark because I'm kind of getting up, doing a quick morning routine, walking the dog, having breakfast, and then getting to work like before anything distracts me too much.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then usually, because the reality is I just get the best work done really before like 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually drafting in the morning, and if there's anything to do in the afternoons will look more like I'm putting some things on note cards and seeing how they stack up in terms of some plot I'm moving around, or I'm kind of like journaling about things that are confusing to me that I'm trying to figure out in some relationships that are in the book, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually doing things that are outside of the actual document and the actual drafting. And
Right.
and that is like when I'm in drafting mode. Then when it's time for the edit, actually though, it ends up looking very similar, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
It ends up looking very similar in terms of like using that afternoon time. And again, not a ton of hours. I'm not pulling like 10-hour days writing. I don't couldn't
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of touching the book in these two chunks of the day.
Mm-hmm.
One chunk being writing and
Mm-hmm.
one chunk being like figuring out what I'm writing.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
how's it going? Where am I stuck? Because when I'm on a first draft, I don't go back.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm not editing as I go. This is something I have to take a look at moving forward because I threw out almost an entire first draft.
Wow.
I wrote it
Wow.
very quickly. I like to write first drafts very quickly because I know I'm going to get rid of a lot of it, but
Mm-hmm.
there is too fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah.
just like kind of looking at that, like, okay, I may be able to like physically throw a story down quickly, but like, is that the best use of my time? How should that look? But I
Mm-hmm.
think to truly answer your question, no matter what, there are these like two sessions in the day, and one of them looks like actually writing, and one of them looks like work surrounding the writing.
Right. So like when you mentioned like you were journaling about a relationship
Hmm.
that you weren't sure about, like what does that look like? Was it like stream of conscious journaling or like what was the
Yeah,
process?
it's a lot of, this is like, I would call it desperate journaling, journaling in total desperation. Because on the
Hmm.
page, it literally looks like, why can't I figure out this relationship? This guy isn't sexy. What am I doing wrong? What would
Hmm.
make him sexy? I'm like addressing the problem and like venting on the page and trying to like pick apart what I don't understand.
Hmm.
What do I need this character to do that he isn't doing? What could be dynamic in terms of them? Like, I'm just asking myself tons of questions and trying to like get my brain to give me the right answers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't, but I find that there's something about like acknowledging the problem head on and
Hmm.
kind of like saying to yourself, I'm stuck. Where am I stuck? What do I hate about this? Like to
Hmm.
go right to the source of the challenge and to like talk to yourself about it is
Yeah.
something that I've used a lot on this book. And I've
Hmm.
kind of that's been like a thing I've done in the past, but I really, really used it in this book.
Do you use those tools like when you have just like general writer's block? Like
Yeah, I
Mm.
do. I do. I try to kind of like, it's like I almost kind of like get into conversation with some other part of myself where I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
what the hell? What's going on here? Like, it's interesting because you'd think that those would be things. It's like, I think this is what I'm uncomfortable bringing to like a friend on a hike. And so I
Right.
just, it feels like that kind of thing where like you're stuck in a story, you go on a hike with a friend, and as you're walking, you're kind of like, I don't know, I'm just stuck with these characters. I can't figure it out. And so I am engaged in that kind of unblocking with myself in a journal.
You're like your own coach in a way.
There is a very late, I'm like looking at the Moleskine notebook where most of this book lived,
Hmm.
and like very late in the game, there is this page, and at the top of the page it says, "What is this book even about?"
Right.
And like those are the questions I'm like constantly like checking in and
Hmm.
asking those questions and figuring out that stuff. And I think there's something so true about even the word coaching as it pertains to writing a big project like this.
Hmm.
It's an endurance game. It's
Mm.
a psychological game. You're constantly trying to hack your brain to perform,
Yeah.
which is, that's kind of like a word I don't like to use. You want to like invite your brain to come
Mm.
to the party of this book. And
Beautiful.
sometimes there's no time for an invitation.
Right.
You need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get to the table now.
Yes.
So like
Hmm.
what are the thousands of tools in all the years that, we've both been at this game that you've figured out, or someone taught you, or artist way, or bird by
Yeah.
bird, like
Hmm.
what are my options here
Right. Yeah.
to, get the athlete to the starting block
Right. Right.
and then
Right.
do the thing.
Yeah. Do you ever like, I mean, I guess maybe because like this literally happened to me today of just like, I think I am overthinking this and I need to like go for a walk or something. Like, do you ever get to those points where you're like,
All the time. And the truth is, I should get there faster. I should walk away. This is something I learned time and time again. Walk away sooner, right? Like,
yeah.
how many times do you solve a writing problem sitting at your computer? Almost never.
Right. Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
idea of like, and here's something I've learned about myself that only in later drafts of writing this, I think I was so insistent on kind of the discipline early on in early drafts. If I am more certain of story, I write very quickly. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to trust myself to spend that time, in imagination, in brainstorm, in the shower, on a hike, in a swimming pool, these places that is all going to continue to come back full circle, feel self-indulgent
Yeah.
and like, how dare I,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm this writer. I get to go do my work at the pool. And it's
Right.
like, I think so. I
Yeah.
think
And it's like,
that is
no.
where it happens.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, it almost feels like I really should be sitting and making my back worse. Like my back should be hurt. If my back doesn't hurt, I didn't write
Yes.
today. Like,
Yes. And if I can't look at, I live with a husband who goes to a job in an
mm-hmm.
executive capacity, right? So like when he comes home, I can't be like, did a lot of beautiful strolling.
Right.
And that was wonderful. And I got incredible ideas, and then I put a few down. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel good, even
Mm-hmm.
though every time those are the solutions.
Yeah, I
Getting
know.
outside
Yeah.
of myself,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like a big, like, I like to like rifle through old vintage clothes at like Salvation Armies and vintage stores, and like rifling. There's something about the process of like rifling through things, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, that just is very like unlocks a part of my brain. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that some of the lessons of this project are like, if you look at my astrology,
Yeah.
a lot of this is spoken to in it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to kind of see that and accept it and say, like, who am I answering for?
Right. Yeah.
You know, when
Mm-hmm.
my kind husband comes home and says, how was your day? I could just say, great.
Yeah.
No one is like, could you please recount the exact amount of time? I'd like
Yeah.
chair time versus strolling time versus like, no one is asking for those
No,
receipts.
yeah. No, of course not. I just think like sometimes like it's like I don't know, like right now with like my day job, like sometimes they'll have to like not spy on your computer, but like they see what you're logged into and stuff, and so like I'm just like kind of like making. I feel like it's like all not like all of life is like that. Like everyone's spying
Yes,
on me and they need to make sure that like I'm being productive.
I know. But I think a little bit of this, if we can like, and we can blame social media for everything, like
Hmm.
we've created our own surveillance culture
We
because
have, yes.
we're so used to being checked in on and
Hmm.
offering check-ins on ourselves,
Yeah.
right?
Like I feel like I'm surrounded by like 12 strict teachers at all times
Yes.
looking over my shoulder.
Yes. And I think, look, also as like women raised in the 80s and 90s, this makes
Hmm.
a lot of sense. Like this is the
Hmm.
culture in which we were raised. And so a lot of that makes sense. And it's funny, right? I struggle to embrace the elements of my life that are the very artisty
Hmm.
elements, this kind of like enigmatic and mysterious, and like I do the work that I do and it takes what it takes and I wear what I wear.
Hmm.
Um, I so remember when it was time when my husband came home, when it was like quarantine, true quarantine before we were going anywhere. One of my greatest fears is if he was going to see how often I change my clothes during the day. Becky, you can't imagine. I'm constantly changing my clothes, which I think is like,
Hmm.
there's something about like, that's how my brain needs to like, oh, this isn't working. This isn't working.
Yeah.
Go
I
change my clothes.
So did he notice like or did like
No, like a ding dong. I gave him a whole speech about it. I was
oh, that's
like,
great.
just so you know, you're going to be coming into the home space to work and you're going to see some things.
Hmm.
So I like announced it. So then, of
Yeah.
course, he saw it because I had
Yeah.
made this grand announcement about how I do this weird thing and I'm such a snowflake artist and like so unnecessary.
Oh, totally. Like it's so funny. Like I went on a trip with my friend recently and like we were both like nervous about like you're gonna see my skin routine or like my hair routine and it's like
Yes.
you're gonna and then like we it happened and we were like well it was like kind of just like normal. Like,
Or fascinating. Like
yeah.
I think Robbie was like, "Oh wow, that's so interesting."
Yeah. Yeah.
He was like, "Why do you think you do that?" And I was like, "I don't know, it feels right to me." Great.
I feel like my friend was like I do like a whole skincare routine but like for me I was like looking at it as like oh no that's not like skincare as much as like self-care like
Yeah,
you have like time for yourself like it's like
that's
meditative
right.
like you know what I mean and I was like I really respect that because like
But
you are
aren't we
way busier than me and like, you still do
it
it.
speaks to like this exact thing of like I do something for me. I've discovered something that's for me, and
Hmm.
therefore it must be judged. It must be weird. It's slightly off kilter in some way, shape, or form. And so
Yeah.
someone is going to tell me that's not the way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if I've learned anything about the process of getting large pieces of writing done, whatever way you get there is the way because it is
Yes.
just
Yes.
so hard.
I know.
So, like,
Yeah.
being worried about how often you change your clothes or, where the ideas come or how many times you need to, like, get up and take a walk around the block is like the least of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny. I think I do change my clothes a lot during the day too. Like, cause I decided I no longer like wearing jeans when I'm
Yeah,
home,
great.
but I'll wear them
That's a
when I'm
key.
out.
That's a key example. Yeah, like
Yeah.
changing. Sometimes it's kind of about like flow. Sometimes it's about like discomfort.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's like, I think that this will make me right. I
Yes.
put this thing on. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's just boredom. I think it's a thing. And I was the kid who my Barbies were never going anywhere or doing anything. They were just changing their clothes.
Of course. It was the most fun part.
So this is like where it comes from. It's like, oh, it's time to change it up. And so
Yeah.
that is what I do. So,
It's just a fun
among a lot
thing.
of other, quirky things, but
Hmm.
enough. I mean, in this world, for us to be worrying, I
I know.
just
I know.
no
You're so
more.
right. Yeah. You're
And
absolutely right.
one of my big desires and dreams to have a chance to write another novel is I just want to see this stuff and these new systems or this attempt at building a new trust in myself, like all these things. I want to put them in play. I want another shot to kind of like
Yeah.
see what that looks like
Of
and what comes into
course.
play. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, listen, this is only the beginning. Like, I feel like just knowing you, like, there's always more. You're a creator, and like, yeah,
Thanks. That's really
yeah,
meaningful.
of
Yeah, and I think
course.
right? It's the ability to kind of pivot and say, okay, where is the industry going? Like, where are the opportunities? I just late to the game, but I just started a Substack just
Mm-hmm.
because it is so exciting to be part of a space where people are writing and there's some freedom, and I'm offering it for free. But if down the road it was something that I wanted to use as a source of, monetization, it's really interesting to like look at all those levers for writers now and to
Yeah.
kind of like tell yourself, I'm not going to stop doing this. So
Mm-hmm.
what are all the options on the table, and how can I think about this, and like where am I now? But I think for a really long time, especially in Los Angeles, I was really thinking about only climbing the ladder of being a television writer.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And this
Mm-hmm.
idea that if I took any time off from that, networking in that space and working in that space and trying to kind of like continue that climb on that specific ladder, that then I was giving myself less of a chance to quote unquote make it, in
Yeah.
that vertical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that that is possible for some people and realistic for some people, but I don't think it was the right path for me.
Yeah, because I had just been like thinking a lot about that lately, and maybe because I just turned 40, but like,
Yeah.
just these like scripts and pilots that I wrote that like,
Yeah.
yeah, I got a meeting and now they're
Hmm.
just like kind of now, but like right now they're just like files on my computer. And it's like,
Yeah.
not that it wasn't, the process wasn't fun or whatever. And it's not
Yeah.
like they're great stuff, but it's just the fact that like, oh, this only got so far and I think it could have gotten further, but I just
Yeah.
wasn't, the door wasn't open. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And then kind of how do you think about that? And how do you think about managing, I think, the time to do the work, and also understanding that for many people, this is the livelihood. So how do I manage that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think balancing that is really hard, but I felt the older I get, and now you're on the other side of this wonderful divide, I do think it is wonderful to turn 40 for women. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if everyone shares this, but I also feel, I don't know, do you share this? I feel like I was born to be an older woman.
Oh, 100%. I've been old since I was like 16.
100% as well.
Yeah.
And I've even been like dressing as an older woman most of my
Mm-hmm.
life, a lot
Same,
of
same.
blazers. So,
Yes.
so it's kind of, so I'm excited to be on the other side of this and to kind of some of those old rules about like the path to go on and what it takes are pieces of the puzzle of things I'm letting go of.
Yeah, yeah. Because like now it just feels like I read this book called Haggitude, such a great name for it. But
Saying everything.
it's like basically like this is, we're finally at a time where like we can do things for ourselves. You know what I mean? And it's just like, oh, this is it. I mean, it could have been earlier, but obviously,
I know. And of course, like, didn't we all, of course, want to be Lena Dunham, right? We looked at
Yes.
her, this ingenue,
Yes.
this young person creating content. But I think I am now prepared to say I was never going to be Lena Dunham. And I
Right.
don't mean that in terms of like a level of success. I mean, that wasn't the age at which I was going to be able to be my bravest and make my best
Yes.
work.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. That's how
There's
I
no
feel.
way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's really
Absolutely.
interesting to kind of now be like, ooh, okay, I'm arriving at this age. What are the barriers that I am keeping in place? So
Mm-hmm.
like getting in touch with what I should be doing and want to be doing, and like what does that all look like? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a little bit of like where my mind is at in terms of if there's a lot of that in this character in all the signs, but I'm kind of looking at that in terms of what's next and playing with the idea of that.
Yeah.
I feel like every book is just like what I'm most afraid of,
I
And
love
so
that. Yeah.
how can I like what's next in terms of like things that absolutely terrify me, and then how could I work them out?
Absolutely. And listen, as a fan and a friend, I'm excited for what's next for you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, okay. Remind us when All the Signs comes out and where we can find you and all that good stuff. And you're going on
Yes.
tour soon too. So if you want to promote any like
Yeah,
dates or
I am.
anything.
So All the Signs publishes on May 6th.
Mhm.
And on May 6th and 7th, I will be here in Los Angeles. May 6th in Studio City at Annabelle's Book Club. May 7th at Zibby's Bookshop in Santa Monica. And then I'm going to be in the East Coast for a bit. All those events are up at jessierosen.com/events. How official. And
Love
then
it.
I feel like the best place to kind of keep up to date with stuff going on is always just on Instagram for me. So that's at Jessie Rosen Writer, and I'm Jessie with an IE. But I also want to respect those that have turned away from Instagram, which can be a very wise decision. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
I'm on Substack. I'm the Substack that I'm writing is called Bravery by Jessie Rosen. So
Oh,
it's Bravery by
awesome.
Jessie Rosen at Substack.com.
Yay! Well, Jessie, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank
It's
you. It's
so
always a
delightful to
pleasure.
talk to you.
I know, and I have to say, as you know, I'm such a fan of all that you do, and I want to shout out to DDPPLA, Dance Dance Party Party Los Angeles, which I got to finally for the first time a bit ago. It's such a special space, and it's interesting, right? It like speaks to a lot of what we've been talking to tonight, which is kind of just having a space to be fully and completely in touch with yourself, and
Yes,
that
yeah.
is rare, and you have created it. So thank you.
Aw, well, I'm so excited to see what future was, and I'm so excited for everyone to read this book. I truly, truly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for giving me an early copy, by the way.
You are so welcome.
Felt so special, and thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
If you like today's episode and want to support the podcast, you can head to tstlpodcast.com/support, or you can follow TSTL on Instagram for all the different ways you can satisfy the show. And if you didn't like today's episode, why'd you listen to the whole thing? You could have just hit stop whenever you were like, you know what, this podcast, not for me. TSTL is part of the Culture Media Network. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a prosperous rest of your day.